This is a message to all my supporters of this podcast. I'm introducing a new supporters program. You can contribute a small amount as a one-off payment to show your love for this podcast. Thank you in advance for all your contributions. I just wanted to let you know before we start the podcast that I am doing an online podcast course, how to be able to create, get your guests, scale it and monetize it. So please do go to abmpodcastcourse.co.uk and go into the contact us bit. I'm looking for new people to be able to be a podcast creator and really to be able to develop their skills and knowledge into a podcast. So as I said, go to abmpodcastcourse.co.uk and sign up. Thanks.
Hi, Alain. How are you today?
I'm great, Mark. It's great to talk to you. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, it's been fascinating. We've just had a quick catch up beforehand, and I really find it interesting when people are really interested in my podcast, because I think it gives you a bit of an insight into my world, as well as being a guest, which I sometimes do as well. So thank you for that. So we're going to go back to your origin story. So you did a degree in arts, English literature and letters at Amherst College. So first question is, why did you choose that degree? And equally, what is literature and letters?
Well, I mean, I think it's basically arts, literature, and letters is the fancy way of saying a liberal arts degree. You know, basically that's what it is. I mean, Amherst College is a very well-known, distinguished liberal arts college in Western Massachusetts. In fact, it's 2 towns over from where I live right now because I love the area so much. I moved back here. But for me, I really didn't know. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do at all. And so I wanted to keep learning. So it was so I dabbled. I like to say, yeah, my degree, I was an English major. And yet that's because that's where most of my credits fell. But, I studied psychology. I studied theater. I wrote plays and did playwriting. I studied Buddhist studies. I was a little all over the place. And yet there's a core theme in all of this, because if you're reading literature or you're reading or writing plays, if you're studying Buddhism, on a certain level, you're exploring the human condition. I mean, so to me, I've always been fascinated by people and why they do what they do, which makes sense as I, look in the rearview mirror of my own personal and professional journey as to why I got interested in helping people to become better leaders. Because in some ways, becoming a better leader means also, it's kind of code for saying, I want to become a better person, right? If you think about, we all have this inherent latent potential in us. What can we do to release that potential and actualize it in our lives to help ourselves, to help our families, to help our communities, and ultimately help the world? So that's where I come from, kind of idealistic.
But you then did a master's in fine art acting, theatre. Yeah. So it really was. Were you a budding actor? Was that something you were?
I was, yeah. So I started acting in college. So before, even going back further, as a child, I had acted in a couple of plays in elementary school. But then I became a violinist, quite serious violinist, in fact, and went to the High School of Music and Art in New York City, which is made famous by the movie Fame. If anyone's ever seen the movie Fame, that was my high school. So basically, I was a violinist. And then when I got to college, I started acting again, enjoyed it, started writing plays, had them produced, and I really got involved in theater. And I loved the community of theater and the collaborative aspect of it. So after I finished undergrad, as many of my classmates were cutting their hair and putting on suits and in interviewing for jobs at advertising agencies and investment banks, I sort of sat there thinking, you're selling out. What are you doing? 'Cause I was like, that was just not where I was at the time at all. And so I decided I did an internship for a year at a regional theater in Milwaukee, one of the large regional theaters in the U.S. Yeah. And then I decided I wanted more acting training. So I went back and I joined a conservatory program, the Masters of Fine Arts at the Professional Theater Training Program at the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee. And it was one of these programs that was modeled on a classic repertory company, whereas in the first year, we would rehearse and we would perform 2 shows in the first year. The second year, we'd perform 5 shows. In the third year, we actually performed 8 shows. This is in 9 months. So we were basically performing at night and rehearsing the next show during the day, every day, which is the way they used to do it in the classic repertory days, which was great training, by the way, because you were always on the go, always learning. And it was great training for both the profession of theater as well as for life. I like to say that if everyone could clone themselves, they should get a chance to go to acting school, because you learn a ton about yourself through the process.
So this conversation can go in three different ways. I'm going to go back, first of all, about violin. So you were quite a serious violinist. Was that something your parents sort of, like, was that part of your upbringing that they wanted you to do violin? And then did you fall in love with it?
Okay, great questions. So a part of my upbringing, so my father is one of 5 kids. All of them are professional musicians. His mother is a violinist. In fact, her claim to fame is she was the first female violinist to play in the Radio City Musical Orchestra. By the way, back then, orchestras were very segregated, by the way, incredibly segregated. And in fact, one of my father's sisters was one of the first women to audition and get a job at the Cleveland Orchestra after they started doing blind auditions, where they would have the auditionees go behind a curtain so they couldn't see them, because the belief was that men were always better than women. And so she was kind of shattered that barrier. So anyway, I got into the violin because I came by it honestly. The family was very involved. So I had a great teacher who was a member of the New York Philharmonic. I played in the Youth Symphony Orchestra. And so to follow up your question is, I did not fall in love with it. I liked it. Here's the thing. I liked being good at it. If you're familiar with Carol Dweck's work around fixed mindset and growth mindset. Yep. So I knew that music was something I was good at and I got praise for, but I didn't necessarily love it personally myself, which is why I think at a certain point I knew I didn't want to do it professionally, because I never had that, oh my gosh, I want to practice 7 hours a day. Now, I would practice enough to be good at this enough to either please my violin teacher the next lesson, or I was competitive enough to try to, move up from the second violin section to the first violin section. And how could I try to be concert master? But I was never great like the concert master was. That's the first chair, because I was never that passionate about it. So yeah, it was an interesting journey learning about my own mindset and beliefs around performance through that.
That's absolutely fascinating. So the other strand that I wanted to go along, do you think your 21-year-old self who was telling people they were selling out in advertising and investment banking, do you think that 21-year-old would think you've sold out now?
Yeah, interesting question. Yeah, I think part of him would in some ways, part of him not. I think it's understanding. I mean, look, I think as we all age, hopefully our worldview starts to widen, broaden, and deepen. And so my 21-year-old self was much quicker to judge and put labels on people and situations. My now nearly 52-year-old self looks at the world differently and realizes that, commerce is a part of life. It's not everything, and certainly by no means, it's not the only thing that drives me. In fact, I do it because it's a nature of the work. I mean, I got involved. So if we can move, we'll kind of move ahead in the story, but the 23-year-old self who decided he was going to do arts and education work after he graduated theater school, suddenly loved the work, but it was very intense, and B, it only paid about $40 a day. And he started to realize, this isn't the most sustainable way to work. You look at what our societies value and compensate. Oftentimes things that are actually the most important, whether it's caring professions, teachers, are some of the most underpaid people in society, right? And so these are the questions that the 21-year-old didn't really have the depth of understanding of any of that stuff. That's a great question, though, Mark. I love that.
And the other one, the other strand I wanted to just touch on is sort of that learning of your plays that you were learning, and then you would learn the next one, and then the next one. Do you think that's helped you further down the line as you were saying about a growth mindset, which is something I'm big on, that people should have that growth mindset rather than fixed mindset? Do you think that your growth mindset was embedded when you had to constantly learn new lines, new plays, etc.?
I wouldn't say it was the new plays, new lines. I think it did get embedded from the process. And I'd say the biggest thing that I took away from graduate school, and this is why I suggest that people should go to acting school if they can, is very early on, to get better as an actor, you have to learn how to separate yourself from the work. And now, which is challenging when because you have a director for a play, and after every rehearsal, they give notes to the characters. So let's say I'm in Hamlet and I'm playing Hamlet. The director is now giving me notes about my performance. He's not giving me notes about Alain as a good or bad person. Mm-hmm. Right? And I think for so many of us, the way we receive feedback, it's really challenging. But the fact is, other people can see us oftentimes better than we see ourselves. And so being okay with not taking yourself so seriously, but taking your work very seriously, I learned that in acting school. And I think that is such a valuable life lesson. So in one way is, how do you have a thick enough skin that you're not so sensitive to, oh, this isn't about me, taking it personally. And at the same time, how do you have a thin enough skin that you are sensitive and aware and can flex and change depending on the situation?
That's so interesting. We're going to talk about emotional intelligence, hopefully, a little bit later on, because you've talked about that as being critical for leadership. So we will get there, I promise. But let's just jump into your... so you worked in a youth centre or at junior high schools as a facilitator, instructor and trainer. You mentioned it just a little while ago that it wasn't particularly fruitful for financially, but... working with underprivileged kids, was it rewarding? Did you get a lot from it?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hi, I'm Alex, the host of X Health Show. Meet the future of healthcare. Think X-Men, that's X Health. Actual superheroes behind programming living cells to cure cancer once and for all. Tech that detects preterm delivery in seconds, brain-computer interface, or apps that employ AI to match you, your disease, with the best treatment. X Health Show brings to you visionaries who push the boundaries of healthcare from Switzerland, the heart of Europe and the most innovative country in the world. Let me introduce you to their startups. Head to X Health Show, meet the future of healthcare. Happy to greet you there.
It was massively rewarding. So yeah, I ended up working with an off-Broadway theater company that had a very strong education outreach component in the New York City community. And so we were working in some pretty hard-hit schools. We did some programs at Rikers Island, the big prison off of Manhattan. We did programs in drug rehab centers. And for me, and this maybe comes from the fact that I was raised by an immigrant mom, is that I saw people as people. And the fact was, I didn't have any judgments of like, oh, you're a kid in a drug rehab center, you're a loser. Like, I didn't have any of that. It was just, and also the work, because we were doing arts and education, oftentimes which involved them telling their own stories in a creative way. Mm-hmm. And as what I have found is that all of us have some amazing aspects to our stories. All of us have been through some kind of conflict and crisis. All of us have learned something along the way. And I just found the work was incredibly rewarding, seeing how so many of these kids, particularly, just had never been given a spotlight, as it were, like a healthy spotlight for them to be seen and then to start to thrive in. And that's some of the work did that. It gave them this opportunity and was really empowering for them. And to see the changes over the course of, we had one residency at one of these drug rehab centers for a year and a half, where they're seeing these kids on a weekly basis. And it was really amazing to see how many of them grew over that time. So yeah, incredibly rewarding work.
It's interesting you say about acting and how it can help people's confidence and as you say, shine a spotlight on them. I was listening to something a little while ago that was sort of saying, as a podcaster, you should contemplate doing acting classes, not to not be authentic, but to learn skills that would help me as a host, as a creator. Would you subscribe to that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, here's the thing. In acting school, you realize as a human being, you are your own instrument of communication. And basically all we have is our voice and our body, our emotions and our expression of that. And so right now, anyone listening to us, what they get is the feeling of through the sound of my voice, the sound of your voice. And also the other thing with acting training is you learn deep listening, because when you're acting on stage with a scene partner or other actors, you're not so much acting as you are reacting and responding to what are the cues they're giving you, and you try to bring it to life. Now, this is the irony of it, because as you said, not to be inauthentic, I mean, in some ways, you think about acting, it's the most contrived thing in the world, right? We have a stage, we have a script, we have to follow these, speak the same words night after night. And yet what we're trying to do is fill that contrivance in with the most authentic, real feeling naturalness. So there's this wonderful paradox that goes on. So the way to access that is the actor has to find some deeper truth so that they can fill this out in a way that the audience walks away and feels it was A, believable, and then B, that they're moved and changed by the experience of that performing art interchange between performer and audience.
That's a really interesting comment. The paradox between being an actor and being an authentic actor, which is bringing a little bit of yourself to the character as well, because I think that's how the best actors get the authenticity is, yes, they would study if it's a person in history or something like, they would study that person, but equally you've got to bring a little bit of yourself to that character as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I just saw, and people can check this out on YouTube, but there's a great YouTube video of Henry Thomas, who was the child actor who starred in the movie E.T. years ago. Yeah. And on YouTube, they have a video of his audition tape. Right. And so they're asking, basically they have someone off camera reading to him, like, you have to give E.T., the extraterrestrial, you have to let him, we have to talk to him. And he's like, no, you can't. He's crying and crying. Like, he's like real tears. I mean, he's awesome. And at the end of the whole thing, Steven Spielberg says, kid, you got the job. Like, he just nailed it. And I saw an interview with him later. He said, yeah, what he did, he was all of 6 or 7 years old. He learned a very simple acting technique, is he would recall the time that his dog had died. So in his mind, he's connecting to a very real memory in his life of sadness, grief, and loss, which enabled him to access this emotion on camera. So it's just fascinating, right? So he's very much really
created for a 6-7-year-old, isn't it?
Oh, I was so impressed. I mean, because if you watch, you're like, oh yeah, this kid gets the job. So yeah, it's worth checking out. So yeah, Henry Thomas E.T. audition scene on YouTube. It's great. I mean, I cried watching him cry. I mean, let's face it, he was awesome.
So then you spent some time in Amsterdam with Netherlands. You were a senior facilitator. So how did you live in Amsterdam for a while?
Oh yeah, wow, we just jumped way ahead, but that's cool. So then I got involved doing leadership training in organizations in the States for years and years and years. I did that for 20 some odd years. I was in the States working and all around the world, but based in the States. And then basically 2 years ago, I was living south of Amsterdam in a little city called Leiden. Basically, my wife and I decided that we wanted to live in Europe with our kids. She had lived in Europe for 6 years before we met. And I said, that sounds great. How's it going to work? Because there's a lot of logistics to making something like that happen, unless you're getting moved by your company, which we weren't. So I thought about it, and our kids kept getting older and older. And I realized by the time they were about 11 and 8, that if we didn't make this happen soon, this was never going to happen. So actually, in the summer of 2018, we all moved over to Leiden, which is a little city south of Amsterdam. And I set up a consultancy there and was based there for 2 years, and just have moved back to the United States just a few months ago in August of 2020.
Oh, my apologies. My research must be a little bit wrong then, because I thought you'd moved relatively soon to Amsterdam. Okay, my apologies about that. So jumping back to Future Think, when I was doing the research, it sounded like it was a really interesting company to work for. So you were training leaders on how to implement an innovative or innovation culture in their business. This sounds really interesting, because I think a lot of businesses, so I've worked in corporate for 15 years, or now left, but innovation is very, very hard to be able to not manipulate, but be able to mold people to be able to be innovative. Yes. How did you try and embed that into companies?
Well, it's so interesting because, you mentioned such an important point here, which is it's especially hard in organizations. In fact, if you look at, and there's all sorts of assessments you can take about how innovative you are, most people who are extremely innovative don't go to work in large organizations, right? Yeah. Because by their nature, they try to institutionalize and codify things so that we have a process. In fact, one of my colleagues, who is the CEO of the company Future Think, Lisa Bedell, has a great line. She says, the only thing more resistant to change than the human being is a company. right? And so if you look at large organizations, you see that all the time. So the work with Future Think and this idea of how do we help people to both be innovative thinkers, as well as if you're in a leadership role, how do you lead innovation? There's really 4 key elements to the framework. The first is the company needs to have some kind of a clear strategy. No one's going to innovate for innovation's sake. So what are we trying to accomplish with our innovation? So that's first, strategy. Number 2 is what is your process around gathering ideas and how do we generate ideas? Because clearly innovation is about how do we create something new that's going to add value either internally or to our customers by doing things in some kind of a new or different way. So we need to come up with new ideas so that we can create innovation. So we need to have a process for dealing with ideas. Then once we do that, the question is, how do we decide, and this gets into the process of we have ideas, which ones do we take beyond the incubation phase? Because the nature of it, I mean, look at nature. You have more seeds than ever bear fruit. So which ones are we going to invest in, tend to nurture, garden, water, seed for them to grow and to bear fruit? Okay, so those are all pretty clear. People get that, like, okay, I need a strategy, I need ideas, I need process. But the piece that most people in organizations don't recognize is if you're a leader, what are you doing to create a climate? So this is the 4th piece. How do you create a climate for innovation to happen? Because it's a very fragile climate that needs to, to tend to things so that they can start to grow. So for example, and I bring this up with groups all the time, and people usually laugh because if somebody comes to you with a new idea, what's your first reaction? Oftentimes like, why don't you go off and get a 50-slide PowerPoint deck and come back with showing me, 2 years of actual projections before we talk about it? Like, no, because we're so rooted to the status quo. Or the other thing around culture will say, no, we want our people to innovate and take risks, but don't screw up, right? So so how do we learn how to embrace failure, quote unquote failure? This, again, going back to our growth mindset idea, and reframe, I'm not failing, I'm learning, and be able to create some low risk opportunities for people to learn by thinking, trying, exploring, doing some beta testing, finding these things out. And that is challenging. So the work that we did at Future Think and some of the other work I do now is all around taking a look at how do you change your mindset, and then here are some really simple and fun practical tools you can use to become a better innovator.
So it's really interesting you say about big companies, because I always think of them as ships, like a cruise ship or whatever. And it takes a long time to actually shift them to a different course than they're on. And I always think that's a good analogy for large corporates, because it does take a while to get them to move into another area. So that's my first comment. The second comment is I worked in Big Four consultancy firms for, as I say, 15 years. And I worked in the technology area. And some of the ways that some Big Fours have tried to encourage innovation is by creating labs, these small teams, no more than 5, 6, 7, sometimes 10 people, who will take ideas that people have had, and that some of them can be literally sending an email saying, I've got this idea. And they spend a short period of time, weeks rather than months or years, on that product, create an MVP, a minimal viable product, and then pass it back to the part of the business for them to be able to take forward. Now, I actually think that is probably the best way of using in a Big Four consultancy firm, because you're getting the expertise of the innovation side, but you are actually giving the responsibility back to the team that created it. What's your thoughts on that?
Oh, I love that idea. I mean, it's great. I mean, so here, what you just shared is a great example of a clear process for how you deal with ideas. So someone has an idea, and then they pass it off to this innovation team who actually has been trained in a certain way of thinking, which probably has a lot to do with the creative problem solving process, which is, first of all, let's take a look at this idea and let's clarify what is the actual problem this idea is trying to solve, right? To back up. Because oftentimes we we could do this, like, but what does our customer actually need, right? So, I mean, the classic example that everyone can relate to on this are all the products from Apple, right? Apple Incorporated because they're known for simplicity. You know, so many technologists like, we could add this bell and this whistle and this, and they're like, no, it's got to be simple, easy to use. All this, people don't want 85 things. What they want is ease of use. So in this case, you've gone to an innovation team. They're clarifying, they're trying things out. They're asking all sorts of open-ended questions. Instead of going, is this going to work? They're going to go, what are all the ways we can find out if this works, right? Which is a very different type of question. It's open-ended and it's generative. So asking a bunch of questions and then developing this minimum viable product and then bringing it back to the business to be a stakeholder about, let's take a look at this and where do we go from here? So no, I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, and then if you go back to small startups and sort of small businesses, their whole premise when you're in a recession or problem time, as we are in with the pandemic at the moment, you have to move faster. You have to pivot your business. You have to change to create another revenue stream or develop something that might come online in a year's time or whatever. But you have to pivot. You have to change for existence. How do you approach that differently from a startup mentality to maybe this sort of lab sort of process idea that they have in corporates?
Well, I think something you're touching on here, Mark, has to do with the speed of decision making. I mean, any entrepreneur, let's look at like a solo entrepreneur. The only person that has to sign off on any decision is themselves, right? So the idea of move fast, let's try this, let's see what sticks. Whereas you think about in a larger organization, there can be so many layers of not just decision making, but just bogged down policies. I'll give you an example. I was just asking someone, this was on a LinkedIn post, because I just had someone teach a master class that I hosted for this 30-day challenge. And she was talking about how do we shed the formalities of both who we are and in our organization. So I asked people, what are some formalities that you think we need to shed? And they were sharing something so specific. They were talking about how in certain organizations, you are either authorized or not authorized to be able to CC all on certain levels of email. And if you just stop and step back out of that, I'm just like realize how insane that entire idea is, in that, I mean, I get what it's designed to do, but it just talk about giant cruise ships that move slowly. I mean, okay, who can CC who, and are you authorized to CC or not, or bring these people on, and who gets to come to the meeting? And I mean, it's just, so what you're saying here about with COVID, I think right now, is how do we start to kill the stupid rules and streamline things so that we can be fast and nimble and find those other revenue streams. I'm kind of blown away. It's amazing how in the last 9 or 10 months it's been around with COVID now, is just how many sacred cows have been slaughtered because people, well, we can't do this anymore. So one of my clients works in the shipping business, and for literally hundreds of years, this is like the global shipping business, those giant container ships, for literally hundreds of years, the law of the shipping world, and I say law because it felt like a law, is that you needed to have a paper signed copy of what they call the bill of lading, right? Which is like, what are the goods that are on board the ship? And that had to be hand signed. And this, well, it's amazing, with COVID, within a week, electronic was fine, right? So, necessity, they say necessity is the mother of invention, and the maternity ward has been booming over this year. Because it has to be, right? We have to figure out new ways to do things. So I think that is a good sign and showing, it's a good signal. Hey, this is the direction you need to head moving forward. You need to start thinking about, how can we do things quicker, faster, cheaper? How do we try these things out? And that's having much more of this nimble, entrepreneurial, innovative mindset.
It's really interesting. I find it fascinating talking about this, because to be able to go from a startup to a big business, you need to implement processes and systems. But then you can almost get to a tipping point of too large an organization. And as you give the example of, there's a policy on who you can CC on emails. Now that for me has tipped over onto almost bureaucracy. There's just a layer of approval which is absurd. Yeah. And actually, some of these larger organizations to exist through pandemic or any other recession, I know the pandemic is very specific and very, very unique, but some of these larger organizations to exist, to keep on existing and not becoming irrelevant, they actually have to become, as you say, more nimble, more accepting failure and moving on. So it's a sort of paradox that we've got, like, you need the processes to scale, but equally, if you go too far, you then lose your relevance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so some of the work that we did at Future Think and some of the work I've done since is this idea of how do you create simplicity? And that is, how do you eradicate unnecessary complexity? And by the way, the highlight on that is unnecessary. The fact is, we need a certain level of complexity to be able to do what we do. If you look at any large organization, there's probably multiple departments and functions to be able to create your product or service. And within that, let's shine the magnifying glass and look for those places where do we have things that just don't make sense and need and should be simplified. And so we want to get rid of any of that unnecessary complexity so that we can get to the work that really matters. So we create value for ourselves, for our teams, our own companies, and obviously for our customers.
I'm going to jump forward a little bit to your new book that came out in COVID, came out in March.
Exactly. Shut down. Here's the book.
Yeah, so it's called Cracking the Leadership Codes, 3 Secrets to Building Strong Leaders. So just tell me a little bit about why leadership, why was it important for you to put pen to paper and create it into a book?
Sure. So why leadership is because as I've taken this, professional and personal journey over these last 20 some odd years, what I found is that my definition of leadership became very broad. My belief is that anyone who is ever trying to influence anyone, and by the way, that anyone could be yourself, it could be somebody else, but influence anyone to try to get anything done, that takes leadership skill. So if you use that very broad definition, leadership is definitely not a job title. It's a state of being and a state of acting in the world, and that all of us would benefit from having better leadership skills. And so as I saw that, what I found, because I was doing leadership training with literally over the course of 25 years, it adds up, over 2,000 different groups, in 25 countries. And what I found was patterns kept emerging, Mark. So I saw the best leaders did certain things in common. They also had certain patterns of thinking in common. And no surprise, the lousy leaders had certain things in common, both thinking and doing. And so I started capturing notes. I started taking notes on some of these stories in 2008 and 2009. In 2011, I started doing a blog. And the first couple of years, I have to admit, the blog was horrible. And it's still online. If anyone wants to read and get a good laugh, it's like, oh my gosh, you're right. Those are horrible. But about 2013, I'd like to think I started to find my voice with my writing. And I committed to a once a week blog posting schedule. And I did not miss a single week for over 3.5 years. So suddenly, got 185, 200 blog posts, and I started reviewing them and categorizing them, looking for common themes. And what I found, Mark, throughout this was that there were 3 overarching themes that kept showing up time and time again as how it related to what does it mean to be an effective leader. And the 3 themes were, one was around connection. Is that one thing is that great leaders connect. They put people before tasks. What lousy leaders do is they put tasks before people. Right. The next one was around communication. What I kept finding was that lousy leaders focus on generating communication. What great leaders do is on generating understanding, which is a huge difference, right? Communication and understanding are huge different things. And then the third thing was around collaboration, is that it turned out that what lousy leaders did is that they created environments by default, whereas great leaders created environments by design. And so connection, communication, and collaboration, those are now what is the subtitle of the book, the 3 secrets to building strong leaders. And I think all of us hearing that intuitively go, oh yeah, connection, communication, collaboration, get it, got it, good, totally makes sense. And all the research would say, if it's so easy, why is it only about 23% of people think leaders are good? Their own leaders are good. And so it's not as easy done as it is said. So the book also explores deeply what are the things that get in the way. So through stories, some examples, some research, and some practical tools, I really wanted to give people a roadmap to help them accelerate their leadership learning curve to help them become better leaders.
I would love you to meet one of my other podcast guests, who's called Mark Ridley, who's written 2 books. One was The Secret Code to Salesman, and the other one, Secret Code of Leaders. And I think there is a lot of harmony, congruence between what you have described there, equally what he's described in his book. And I think there are trends. I think there are similarities between leaders and how to be a good leader? As you say, everyone goes, oh, yeah, those three things are real. Yeah, I agree. But then actually practically implementing them is a little bit harder and a little bit more of a challenge for people because of people's upbringings and people's experiences are all different.
Absolutely. And let's face it, to implement them, you need to develop habits, much in the same way as if we were to sit here and do a podcast conversation around having a healthy life. I mean, there's no one listening right now that doesn't know that eating healthy food and exercising is good, right? We all know that. Like, and I should probably eat more fruits and vegetables and lean protein, whatever. Right? We all know this stuff. And look at the statistics of how many people actually do what they know. There's this huge gap.
Yeah. And the other thing I thought was interesting, though, you said is that it's actually a broad church leadership. So I've been saying this since I started my podcast, that there's leaders all through organizations. It isn't, as you said, it isn't a title. You should be, and this is what I tried to do in my corporate career, was I tried to be a leader, even if I was a junior. When I started, I acted as a moral and as a business leader, even at those early stages, because the aspirational was to become a leader. So I thought, I think people listening to this podcast will feel empowered because they need to act like a leader, even if you are a more junior member of staff.
That's great. And what you're just talking about, acting as if, suddenly it kind of echoes back to our conversation about acting school, right? You have to act as if. You have to inhabit the character of what does it mean to be a leader, which is why I like to say that leadership is a performing art. And again, that's very much informed by my life in drama school. And as you said, Mark, when you started as a junior, you didn't have the title of leader, but you found and you inhabited the qualities of leadership, which were not title dependent at all.
Yeah, absolutely. So why do you think that emotional intelligence is so important for leaders?
Well, at its core, leadership isn't about a job title, as we've said. It isn't about power or control. At its core, leadership is about a relationship between two people. And if you look at what humans are designed to do really well with our senses, is we're actually designed to be able to notice and pick up on the emotions of those around us. As well as because what that does is it's a warning sign. If people around us are suddenly freaking out and scared, maybe there's a building on fire. Maybe there's a saber-toothed tiger in the woods. We have to run. So emotional intelligence is the basis for being able to build strong relationships. And all the research would say that for people to perform at their best, they need to feel both connected and they need to feel safe, both physically safe, like we're dealing with within COVID right now, but also psychologically safe. Because what that does is it actually calms the central nervous system, gets it out of the fight or flight or freeze response so that we can actually focus and freed up to do the things we want to do and perform at our best. And I think in some ways, the leader's number one job, and one of my other colleagues, Tony Schwartz, talks about this, is he uses this wonderful analogy. He says that we're all CEOs. We're all the chief energy officers, right? That other people pick up on our energies. That energy is contagious. Like we all know that, right? When you go into a room, there's a certain mood, whether that's, getting your driver's license renewed at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. And, if you have to go to a public bureaucracy, like what's that mood like? Or if you're going to hang out with your best friend. And so emotional intelligence lies at the heart of what it means to create relationships where people can thrive or don't.
And is empathy a massive factor in that?
I think it's the first thing. I write about this a lot. Yet to me, the core of emotional of intelligence is empathy. And just for those listening, my really simple working definition of empathy, because I know we think, I know what that means. To me, it means showing people that you understand them and that you care how they feel. And again, as you're hearing that, you're going, that makes sense. I get it. Well, the research would say that while we get it in theory, we don't necessarily get it in practice. So it's a great research that was done that within organizations, 92% of CEOs were like, yes, our organizations are definitely empathetic. So they interviewed all the employees in those same organizations, and the employees said that only about 50% of the CEOs were empathetic, right? So there are these big gaps. And what I found is that when it comes to empathy, there are some good, valid reasons. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't overcome the reasons, but big reasons why people don't show more empathy, particularly in the workplace. The first one has to do with time, because that definition, right, showing people that you understand them and care how they feel, isn't some task you can just check off of a to-do list. Yeah. And we're so used to, emails travel at the speed of light. We're living in the information and knowledge work age. So it's kind of like, okay, Mark, get it. Let's go. We got stuff to do. And the fact is, showing people empathy means showing them patience. And patience is in hugely short supply these days. So the challenge for us as leaders is, a lot of us, and maybe when you were working at one of the big four, Mark, you realized that drive for results is in many places considered a core leadership competency. And that's true. Like we need to achieve results. However, driving for results should not come at the expense of driving over the people who are trying to deliver those results. So here is yet another leadership paradox in the many that we've talked about today, which is I think we need to, as leaders, have the wisdom to know there's a time and a place to go fast and get stuff done. Yeah. And there's a time and a place to go slow when we are not actually trying to get people done, but to listen and empathize with people. So that's one of the big ones. Another big challenge around empathy has to do with fear. I mean, because showing people that you care how they feel means that you're okay with emotions in the workplace. And there's still generations of people who were brought up with the idea of, this is work. You check your feelings at the door. We don't do that here. And even though when they hold on to that, it completely impacts the people around them because people pick up on it. And what's weird is that, you can't actually check your feelings at the door, even if you tried. What you will do is you will suppress your feelings at the door. And in fact, Deloitte did this great study a few years ago. They found that 61% of employees, this was a US-based study, 61% of employees cover their identities in some ways. They don't feel safe bringing their whole selves to work because they feel like it will be in some way a career-limiting move. And so what we know from the research is that when you cover yourselves or wear the psychological mask, you can't but help but be disconnected, which will create a more low trust, low empathy, and low connection culture. So those are just a couple of things around empathy. Yeah,
absolutely fascinating. And I want to ask about the research which you've got from. I just want to ask one question before that. Is do you think the culture of empathy and sort of emotional connection and caring about people's ethics have been driven by Gen Z and millennials coming into companies and coming into even leadership roles as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say Gen Y, Gen Z is totally, because if you think about, and let's even back it up further, part of it has to do with the way Gen Y and Gen Z were raised. I mean, I'm a Gen Xer, I'm almost 52. And, if you look at boomers and Gen Xers, I mean, the idea was like kids, there was a lot of much more adultism going on just in the child raising. It's like, shut up, you're a kid, stay out of sight. It was way more common for kids to get hit, right? Or screamed at. Well, then the boomers started having kids, Gen Y, and then this idea that children are these valued resources. And so they are used to being treated with respect their entire childhood. And so when that group grows up and becomes part of the workforce, why wouldn't you keep treating me with respect? And if you don't treat me that way, guess what? I'll leave. If I have to, I'll move back at home with mom and dad because I've been respected by them. And so they have completely changed the equation. I mean, as you know, and this is true in the Big Four and many other consulting firms as well, the old value proposition was you brought the best and brightest, you recruited them out of college, and you would churn and you would work them hard and you would grind them. And you knew that you'd have attrition and people would leave, but many would stay. Well, as Gen Y and Gen Z hit the workforce, that model stopped working. And all those firms had to go, oh my gosh, we have to change because they are not putting up with this old thing that basically boomers and Gen Xers would deal with. So yeah, this is completely informed. I think they have been driving the bus in terms of why these changes are happening.
Yeah, I would agree as well. So just tell me about the research that's on the background of this book. What was there specific research which you've used as part of your evidence? Yeah,
I mean, basically, specific. As I was researching all these different subjects, I went to see what else was out there. Because I don't do. I mean, I have qualitative research just on my own anecdotal experience of working with thousands of groups, which is included as well as stories. But I felt like I needed to have larger sample sizes and data. So it wasn't just me and like I talked to this one person and here's my model on a cocktail napkin, because I think there's a lot of that out there. So yeah, the book has got 30 pages of footnotes where I cite different research from different people, like the Deloitte study I mentioned, or the study around empathy comes from Business Solver. So there's these different places that have done research, because I think just being able to ground this with a sense of here's what people have looked at. And what's interesting is that, whether you want to quibble, look, if we want to say, look, I don't know if it's 23% of leaders lead well or 27%, frankly, at the end of the day, step back, we know that the number is poor, right? And so I think it anchors that, and if you want to, I don't know, there's some people who just, I understand that we want to have a certain level of validity to this, and different studies are going to come up with different percentages. And for me, the research was key to showing the fact that, yeah, we are in a bad state when it comes to leadership overall. And here are things that we can start to do to get out of that. And that you're going to have to start doing that at the individual level.
Absolutely. Right. Let's just take a switch to, so you're the founder and CEO of Hunkins Leadership Group. So is it based upon leadership as the core of the company as a consultancy business?
It is, yes. It's basically based on these ideas that how can we help people to achieve performance goals easier? And, when I'm consulting with clients, I always ask them, I say, so there's a pretty good chance that your leaders all got there because they were high performers, right? They did things well. They said, hey, Mark, you're a high performer. We should promote you into leadership. The challenge, of course, is that there's a huge gap between being a high performer and facilitating high performance in others. And just working harder, which, by the way, is what most high performers do, just working harder is not going to close that gap. And so what they need to adopt is what I call the facilitative mindset, which is a set of beliefs and behaviors to help others achieve performance goals easier. So yeah, the work of Hunkins Leadership Group focuses on how do you help high performers become high performing leaders. And we do that through coaching, we do that through speaking, we do it through training, and then consulting and creating some kind of leadership development solutions so that people start to develop not just the mindset, but then develop these skill sets, which are grounded in those three overarching areas of connection, communication, and collaboration. So they kind of have the mindset and the skill sets. And then the next piece is to how do you embed the habits? Because as we said, people can understand, use a tool once, but how do you start to develop and embed those habits long-term for behavior change that lasts to change results?
Something you said I think is very important is it comes an Elon Musk quote has just come to mind, who said, I didn't go to Harvard Business School, but I employ people who did go to Harvard Business School. And I think that sort of mentality of employing the best to facilitate them to be the best people they can be is a part of leadership which sometimes isn't given as much importance as I think it should be, because there's still maybe a misconception that leaders are the smartest, the best, the most talented. Well, in actual fact, often great leaders are the people that inspire, empower, and embed good habits into their business rather than them being the best.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. This is why I say I love this idea of the leader as facilitator, having that facilitative mindset. And so many of us still have these inherited ideas and beliefs that leaders should be they call it the great man theory of leadership. And they did call it man because it was very male centric. So it just kind of shows you how dated it is already. But the sense that somehow one person would be this superhero, all seeing, all knowing, have all the right answers, be this genius. See, the beauty of the shift into the information age is that, anyone with an internet connection can be as smart as you can. And so realizing that and no longer do we have this hoarding of information where you have this asymmetry where some people have the information and we spoon it out to the commoners, whereas everyone has access. So the real question is, as a leader, how can you facilitate moving great ideas and insight from where they are to where they need to be? Then how do we collaborate, make decisions, and take actions so that we can create these results, which is very much based on this facilitative mindset. I also like to think that as the facilitator, you are both at the same time. There's another paradox for us today, Mark, is that you are both the most important person and you are the least important person, right? So, and I think what great leader/facilitators do is they hold that paradox very well.
Excellent. As I mentioned about your time in Amsterdam, so you set up AlainHunkins.com, which is still based in in the Netherlands. Is that right?
It's well, actually, AlainHunkins.com is technically based in the cloud. So this is the beauty of it. So yeah, I mean, I have a Dutch business, and now I'm closing the Dutch business down because I moved back to the States. But it's the same business. I mean, this is the beauty of our 21st century world. So yeah, it's now based wherever I'm based, which is convenient. So, which right now is Western Massachusetts, in the U.S.
All right, we're coming to the end of the interview. I ask 6 questions, the same 6 questions to every guest that I have. They're short, sharp questions. They don't need a short, sharp answer. It's up to you. Number 1, what's the best decision that you made?
Best decision I made was choosing the woman who's my wife now. And I think that because who you spend most of your time with is going to greatly impact the culture in which you're going to live. So yeah, she has challenged me, stretched me, grown me, made me think, and loved me and supported me in my own growth and stuff. So yeah, that's number 1 would be choosing. Shout out to Mary Clark. Thanks for being my partner for the last 20 years.
Awesome. What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
Oh my gosh, there's so many good pieces of advice. So I'm going to think about this. The best, put some pressure on. I'm going to share a piece of advice that I come back to again and again and again, which is the number 1 thing you can do to continue to grow is to get feedback from outside yourself. It is, I think, so underutilized and something that is really actually easy to do once you learn how to do it. The thing you have to do is get over your own fear and step into your courage of being okay with people sharing things that you, quote unquote, think are going to sound bad. But I think the number 1 thing you can do is get feedback. So that's the number 1 advice, because I come back to it all the time.
I wish we'd had time to be able to go into delving feedback, because I think it's a really interesting area, because you need feedback to grow and get better at your job and be a better, whatever that is, lawyer, consultant, whatever it is. But actually, sometimes people are so sensitive to difficult messages that they'll dismiss that feedback because it was almost a little bit too hard to take.
Completely. I'll come back on. We can talk about it. I do whole workshops on feedback. So no, I love this and the other thing around this, Mark, too, is so few of us have actually seen great delivery of feedback role modeled. It's really hard to do something that you've never actually seen in person.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Number 3, who helped you most in your career?
Wow. There's probably multiple people have helped me most. I have had, some people talk about mentors with a capital M. I've had a bunch of, I'll call lowercase m mentors, just people who I've reached out to and have stayed in touch with over time. So I have, numerous people have helped me, and come back.
Shout out to a couple of people then.
Yeah. So one is a guy named Jeff Altman, who is a mentor and a coach of mine. I write about him in the book at times. Another one is a guy named Gary Zaremba, who I've been in touch with quite a bit as well. A woman named Christy Pettit, who was one of my early managers who really took an interest in me and believed in the work that I did. I will also give a shout out to Lisa Bedell, the CEO of FutureThink, working there. I learned a ton about innovation and grew through her. And also she role modeled, she was an author. So I got a lot of role modeling from her. So yeah, lots of people have helped me. And the other thing, those are all people I know personally. The other people who have helped me a ton, and I could go through a list. And if you read through the acknowledgments of my book, they're there. These are people whose books I've read who have impacted the way I see the world. So not to be discounted, these great thought leaders, people like Daniel Pink, people like Jim Kouzes and Perry Posner, who wrote the Leadership Challenge. So to me, they have completely shaped how I see things in the world. Stephen Covey, the author of 7 Habits, completely has shaped things. So, I give shout outs to these people because we do have an impact in that way when we're sharing those ideas through paper.
Do you have any regrets?
Do I have regrets? Yes, I will. Here's the regret. And I mean, I accept this, but I look back at, we talked earlier about this kind of growth mindset, fixed mindset. I just look back at the 22-year-old self who actually I wish he would have been okay with taking some more risks. I think about, so for example, being an actor and thinking about the field and how quickly he talked about thin skin and feedback. what would it have been if I said, like, yeah, I'm going to go to California and try this thing for a while. I mean, I'm happy with the course of how things turned out, but I wish that 21, 22-year-old self had a little bit more self-confidence to take more risks.
Fair enough. What are you most proud of?
I am most proud of my kids, not maybe for the obvious reasons. So I've got a 16-year-old son and a 13-year-old daughter. I think they're amazing, and I give 99% of the credit to my wife. I think she's amazing. I mean, I do my part too. I'm a good dad, and that was really important to me. I mean, my parents split up when I was 1, so I learned a lot what not to do from that experience. And the other thing connected to raising my kids, I like to say that I've been on the slow track to success. What I mean by that is that, becoming well-known and like a thought leader in the field and an expert and like on the cover of this magazine and that actually hasn't been the main driver for me. It's all been within balance. And so I feel like my kids keep my feet on the ground in terms of what's really important in life. And so for that, I am thankful and I'm grateful. And I'm also really proud of how that's played out.
Yeah. So quick story. My kids are 4 and 6. And you can't get too full of yourself when you've got to then come home and change a nappy. And it's just the great leveler, the great foundation, which I'm so happy to have in my life as that foundation as well. So I agree.
Yeah, no, it's been great. So yeah, I'm super proud of them. And they're amazing people. They're really amazing people.
Last question. What does legacy mean to you?
Legacy to me means first being really intentional and clarifying what my own purpose and mission on this planet is. So I hope that everyone can find that. I know that for me, my mission is to create a more vibrant and alive world by kindling the fire of brilliance in people. So that's my mission. And so for me, what legacy is about is how can I live that mission every single day so that every person that I interact with, that mission rubs off on them in some way. And I'm not going to be the one who's going to count out how many people that's rubbed off on and what that's going to look like. But I think that if I keep showing up and staying in love with the process and know that it's congruent with what my values are and my mission and my purpose are, I think then the legacy will end up speaking for itself. Because I don't think we control our legacy. I think what we do is we have some say in terms of clarifying why we're here and then doing what we do to support why we're here.
Absolutely. Right, Alain, where can people find you when they want to?
Sure. Easiest place to find me is if you go to the book's website, which is www.crackingtheleadershipcode.com. That will take you to the webpage that has everything about the book. You can learn about the book. You can actually download the first chapter right there from that page. That links directly to the AlainHunkins.com website. You can learn about all the other work that I'm doing. I'm running these wonderful 30-day online leadership challenges. The next ones start in January and February. Anyway, you can learn all about the work that I'm doing with both individuals and teams and organizations to help people to become better leaders in their own lives and have more of an impact on those around them.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alain, for your time today. It's been great hearing your story.
Mark, thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Cheers.
To make sure millions of people are getting paid on time and in compliance, ADP is staying on top of each new piece of legislation. So when it comes down to it, ADP isn't just a payroll and HR company. We're the company that helps you navigate complexity. Learn more at adp.com. News, laws, and regulations are changing by the day. We get it. It's hard to stay on top of it all. That's why ADP is here to guide you with up-to-the-minute compliance expertise to help you navigate these complex times so you can pay your people accurately and on time, regardless of changes in legislation. When you rely on us for payroll and HR, you're trusting us to help you take care of your people. It's what we've been doing for over 70 years, and that's not about to change. ADP, HR talent, time, benefits, and payroll, informed by data and designed for people.